I love anime, and the part I love most about my favorite shows is the unique power system special to each of them, and for that reason, I've always dreamed of making my very own. In fact, I actually made one of these not too long ago that was based on the power of the 7 gods of reality known as the totems, where users could summon power through tattoos on their body to make all kinds of physical tools with unique abilities, but this video isn't about that. Today, I wanted to take another crack at making a power system completely from scratch, so I did. This new system is based on what I call shards, which are fundamental laws of existence that shape the world. These shards were once part of a massive primordial canvas that contained all aspects of life, before it was mysteriously shattered, leaving individual shards scattered across the world. There's hundreds, possibly even thousands of shards out there, with some being very specific with powers based on things like rust, smoke, or sound, all the way to the more advanced shards like manipulating gravity itself. That's about as much as I can explain briefly, so if that interests you at all, then come with me as we dive into the rest of this epic system. Before I can explain the details about the shards' powers, I think I need to do a little more background on what shards really are. Like I mentioned in the intro, each shard is technically a smaller piece of a massive puzzle. Before the world as we know it existed, reality was simply a seamless tapestry that embodied the potential of the universe. A massive interconnected web of existence held together solely by unity. Now that might sound a bit confusing, and it's kinda supposed to be that way, because the primordial canvas is pretty much incomprehensible. There were no people, no independent thoughts or actions, just a pure world of energy and eternal harmony, a canvas full of possibility. But one day, there was a cataclysm. No one really knows how or why it happened. Think of it like the Big Bang in the real world. This caused a ripple effect, breaking the canvas into several smaller pieces which we now call shards. Each of these shards now takes the form of a glowing crystal or gem-like structure, and by touching a shard, people can understand which aspect of existence it controls. There also seems to be these mini worlds and dancing refracting patterns in each shard that distinguish them from others. For example, the shard of fire might look like a crimson red gemstone that seems to have embers dancing around refracting in ways that look magical. Or the ocean shard may be a spherical crystal that when looking inside has what looks like waves crashing against the edges in a never-ending tide. Now while the exact number of shards is unknown, there seems to be at least a few hundred, with some people speculating that there may even be upwards of 1,000. The amount of shards that govern universal concepts like light, gravity, death, space, and all that kind of metaphysical stuff is quite limited, but the massive number of shards mostly comes from the incredible amount dedicated to very specific aspects about the world. Things like specific types of animals or plants, different elements, subtypes of those elements, and all other kinds of things could potentially have a shard corresponding with them. With so many shards though, it's kind of hard to know what actually exists and what doesn't, especially because so many shards are either undiscovered, protected or passed down through families, or kept secret by organizations with ulterior motives. Now with what these shards truly are out of the way, it's about time we get into what these things can actually do. So how does someone even use a shard, you might ask? Well, it's not as simple as just touching it to gain its power. A user has to physically fuse with the shard to utilize it. For the most part, shards are completely indestructible. However, there is one exception to that rule where they can be broken and absorbed into the body. If a person is ready and willing to fuse their body with the shard, it turns from something unbreakable into an object that can be crushed simply by squeezing it in one's palm. When the shard is crushed, its aura spreads out in the air before wrapping around the user's body, enveloping them in a glowing hue. That person then gains some physical characteristic to signify their shard. These traits are usually only cosmetic and don't change much about the person, although the more powerful the shard is, the chance for a greater change to the body is higher. Taking the shard of fire and ocean examples from earlier, fire may give the user eyes that glow in a fiery haze, while ocean may cause someone's hair to float like it's in the water. The people who use the power of shards are called resonants, as they're resonating with the particular shard to use its power. Now if you're wondering if someone can use multiple shards, I'll get into that in a second, but for now I should mention how someone can actually wield their power. Since shards are the concepts of existence, they often have a wide range of uses. However, different individuals can use the same shard in different ways depending on their creativity or natural affinity to certain styles. Say for example there's a father who resonated with the shard of trees. This man might have used his power to cultivate forests in areas that have been burned down to a crisp, or maybe just provide more nature to desolate areas. Then say he passes that shard on to his son, where the boy is much more battle oriented and learns how to manipulate tree branches for combat utility. Each person can technically do the same thing with their shard, but the specific applications can vary heavily from user to user. This is also a good time to mention that while shards become ingrained into someone's body and they lose their physical form, to return a shard back to its original state, the user can either willfully summon the shard out of their body or it can be forcibly taken from them on death, as it will reconstruct outside of their body. This way shards can be freely moved around from person to person instead of being fully locked into someone, letting all kinds of different people use the same shard's powers in different ways. Now back to what would happen if someone tried to use multiple shards at the same time, that detail leads me into my favorite part of the system by far. Since shards are essentially a massive puzzle that can only be put together if every part is connected perfectly, shards become extremely unstable and unnaturally fused together. This means that if someone tries to absorb the power of two shards, what started as two individual powers that could grant the user additional strength at little to no cost becomes a fractured object that can significantly alter the user. these people become what I call canvas wraiths, which are these monstrous creatures with all kinds of different features corresponding to the shards that they fuse with. While these wraiths gain the power to use multiple shards abilities, they completely lose their humanity and sense of personality, essentially becoming a Nomu-like creature meant for pure destruction. The reason they turn out this way isn't just because they absorb 2 shards, but because those shards technically fuse together in their body. So if a canvas wraith is defeated and that shard materializes outside of them, it won't be the original 2 shards anymore, but a much darker combination of the two. Now there are purification rituals and people with certain powers that can separate these pieces back into their natural state, but if the shards are more powerful or there's additional pieces, the wraiths become much harder to take down and their shards become much harder to purify. Now this isn't a story video, but if it were, the main antagonist in the story would absolutely have the goal of trying to collect every shard to reshape the primordial canvas, and bring back life to a constant state of harmony, but wiping out the world as we know it. He would absolutely be creating armies of canvas wraiths to fuse shards and fight off the main characters who are trying to keep the shards separate, which personally I think is a very cool concept. I could also see specific characters being able to temporarily utilize the power of multiple shards without fusing them together for some pretty cool story beats. Now with all that out of the way, I think it's about time that we dive into some of the specific shards themselves and their abilities. Now while I can't go over literally every single shard since the amount is just way too high, I can at least highlight some of my favorites that I would love to exist in this world, starting with something like the Shard of Reflection. This shard's name is very fitting for what it looks like, as it would be a perfectly spherical crystal where unlike other shards that seem to have little worlds inside, this shard casts a perfect reflection no matter how you look at it. You can try and scuff it up and damage it, but no matter what, it'll always cast a reflection more perfect than any mirror could ever achieve. Crushing this shard would cause silver mist to spread out around the user, before seemingly morphing into a fractal-like pattern causing the world around the person to become unrecognizable, then quickly snapping into the user and applying some kind of marker on their body. Maybe their nails turn into perfect mirrors, or maybe they gain bands around their arms that cast reflections. This shard would be great not only for deception, but also defense and control. Users could create perfect reflections of their own body that would essentially make clones to fake out enemies and confuse them, or even reflect certain objects or locations, making enemies second guess everything around them. But reflection isn't just good for visual tricks, it's also great for physical attacks too. Say someone blasts off some kind of large attack in your direction, throw up a mirror with the power to deflect that attack and send it right back where it came from. You could even set up reflectors in such a way that you reflect sound back at your opponent, confusing their positioning. Or maybe for even greater psychological damage, you could learn to reflect their thoughts in an intricate way, making them extremely perplexed on what's even going on in their mind. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the shard and I think it has some super awesome use cases. I've just always been a massive fan of using powers that aren't inherently meant for damage to dominate in fights, but let's move on. I'd like to talk about the Shard of Judgement next, with its abilities being a bit more metaphysical than the rest. This shard looks extremely unique, because while the base shape is pretty similar to a light yellow topaz style gem, the inside of the shard changes depending on who's viewing it. If you're a warrior who fights to protect innocents from canvas wraiths, you might see a snapshot of what looks like a mini war between people like you and the wraiths. Or maybe if you have someone that you heavily look up to and think that their word is law, you might see that person within the gem. Whatever a person's true sense of judgment is, that physically is represented within the shard itself. That also means that crushing the gem can look a bit different from person to person. Like if someone is generally good-spirited, they might have a glowing yellow aura blast into the air, while those with ill intentions may create swirling patterns of darkness that dissipate into their body. A person might gain a glowing band of light that stretches across their forehead, or maybe even a gavel-shaped tattoo that glows harder the more power that they use. Now as for the power itself, it heavily depends on who's using the shard, but generally it's used to impose certain punishments depending on how deserving the user thinks the opposition is. If someone is insanely devoted to the law and believes that even minor infractions deserve harsh punishments, the power of judgment may be able to physically restrain them, silence them, cause pain, or even possibly grant the user a tool capable of one-hit KOing their target upon a greater infraction, kind of like Higurama's technique in JJK. The power of the shard is a bit more open-ended than some of the others, but its main restriction comes from the fact that to use incredibly powerful abilities, the user must believe in their heart of hearts that the enemy deserves whatever's coming to them, making it a power heavily tied into emotions and morality, which I absolutely love. I'd like to mention the Shard of Storms next, which I personally think is a very cool concept even if it's a more common power that has been showcased in all kinds of media. I imagine this fragment as a more jagged looking translucent crystal with white, blue, and yellowish colors, where upon looking inside you can see the swirling of storm clouds full of lightning and rainfall. And if you listen closely you can even hear the sounds of thunder cracking as gusts of winds blast against the inside of the gem. When this shard is crushed, the particles seem to blast violently into the air as gusts of winds and streaks of lightning dance around the user, before enveloping their body in a glowing aura and changing their physical appearance. Glowing lightning-style eyes, thunderous-looking hair that crackles as it bounces in the air, or maybe even tornado-like rings that circle around a person's wrists and ankles. This shard will grant the user all kinds of powers, like being able to manipulate the current state of weather or even summon new storms entirely. I'll say that when using a shard's power that correlates with something physical, it's much easier to manipulate a pre-existing element like making a tornado larger and faster, but one could still fully conjure up abilities themselves. It would just be more draining. This person could even apply certain elements of a storm to themselves, like spinning their body fast enough to become a living tornado or using the power of lightning to blitz around with incredible speed. I know storm style powers aren't the most unique idea, but I've still always been so fascinated by this type of power that I figured I really wanted to include it. The Shard of Sound is next, and it's one that might sound less powerful on paper, but with creative applications it can be an incredibly strong power. This shard resembles a light orange circular crystal with spiral patterns on the outside. Looking inside the gem doesn't really show much of anything except for some floating particles, although the gem does seem to vibrate and you can clearly hear the gem's hum from a moderate distance away. Upon crushing the gem, there's only a few visual particles that disperse, but all kinds of sounds erupt from the shard before quickly condensing into that person's body and fading away. Upon resonating, a person may gain larger elf-style ears or markings on their cheeks that seem to swirl and pulse as the user speaks. While sound powers are most often depicted as large blasts of pure power, users can do a lot more than just projecting shockwaves. Obviously they can still do large-scale attacks, but they can also condense their sound into precise blasts that can knock someone out, communicate over long distances, or even alter their own sound waves to make a noise that only specific people can hear while tuning out others. Sound is made up of many different vibrations, so with the right pitch and frequency, users could even cause tremors, earthquakes, or even fly by projecting sound like Banshee from X-Men. But it's not just enhancement of sound. Users also have the ability to tune it out completely, creating zones of silence where enemies can't communicate or hear a thing. Overall, this shard is a pretty solid power that has some great use cases, and I could totally see all kinds of different people using this shard in different ways. The last shard that I'd like to mention is the Shard of Vitality, which is a power with some absolute insane potential. It looks like a jagged red heart-shaped crystal that when looking inside seems to pulse with this glowing red aura. Upon crushing it, a red mist shoots out that circles around the user, with a strong feeling of life energy radiating in the air before collapsing into a user's body. Now while a resonance body wouldn't gain something as specific as some of the other shards, their physique would absolutely bolster in size and any injuries or abnormalities would fade, essentially turning this person into a Giga Chad type of character. Vitality means to be strong and full of life, so the power of this shard would mostly just be physical. Obviously there's increased strength, speed, and reflexes, but most of all durability would absolutely skyrocket with this shard, and it would become incredibly hard for anyone to take this person down. The user could also shift and strengthen their energy in their body, which for example could make someone's hands insanely large and powerful for insane punches and claps, with the trade-off of having to weaken their body everywhere else. This shard being full of life also provides the ability to heal much better than your average person from even massive injuries, so as long as the user doesn't get fully KO'd, they can pretty much recover from anything as long as they have enough time. Now although much harder to do, I could also see a Resonant gaining the power to control the vitality of others as well, strengthening allies' defense or weakening opponents. Both are possible options. Overall though, I think that this shard is very cool and has some awesome powers, even if it might not be as complex as some of the other shards, but it would certainly make for some very funny and hype characters. And that's mostly everything. Obviously there's plenty of more shards like your obvious elements of fire, stone, ice, and wind, as well as the more advanced ones like gravity, darkness, decay, barriers, which are all super cool in their own right. So let me know if you guys want me to make another video on these shards because I'd love to do a deeper dive on some of these powers, or maybe even another partial story like I did in my last video about the totems. Anyways, I didn't want to overwhelm y'all with too many shards right off the bat, so let me know if y'all want to see more of this system and give me your ideas for potential shards in the comments. I always appreciate your guys' ideas because each of them is something that I would never have thought of, and the ideas that y'all come up with are just so cool and I'd love to hear them. Alright, with all that said though, that's about all I've got, so make sure to like and subscribe for more videos, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!